The day I met him. It was another rainy day at Sunnybridge Town. I had constantly wondered who the hell gave that pathetic name to a town where it rains for over 160 days a year. I had been there for 6 months already, and it was time for me to leave. I was only waiting for the end of the month, so I could get my salary from the Belladonna Cafe. It was the 28th of September. I remember that date well, because it was the day I met him for the first time. There weren't any customers at the cafe, so Jeanette and I were dying from boredom. I had already cleaned up all the tables and wiped the floor twice. Maybe Donna let us go early today? Who would want to go out when it rains like that? Jeanette asked. Don't count on it, I chuckled, mocking her hopes. Even if no one comes here for a month, she will gladly find us new places to clean, or she will bring the paint and tell us to change the wall color. Jeanette glared at me and clicked her tongue. You're no fun at all, Lilith, she hissed. She would probably have hit me with the cloth she was holding in her hand, but the bell sound of the opening door interrupted her. We held our breath, hoping for a customer that would save us from agonizing monotony. Someone who would give us a tip would be even better. Certainly. Our hopes were crushed along with the view of our favorite 6-year-old twins walking inside the store. Patrick, Paula? Why aren't you at school? I asked, looking at the twins wearing soaking wet, yellow rainy coats. The school was flooded, Paula informed, grinning. We want Lilith's chocolate muffins. I sighed, shook my head in disbelief, but then smiled. These children were like a ray of sunshine in this gloomy town. They lived with their parents just around the corner, and they were our regulars. I thought that if I missed anything from this place after leaving, it would be those two always grinning faces. I baked new ones today. I winked, corrected the cotton gloves I always wore on my hands, and took out 2 muffins from the baking sheet. These are with white and raspberry chocolate. The kids started eating them right away. It literally took them 5 seconds for the muffins to disappear. Wow. It was super yummy, Lilith. Patrick called, licking off chocolate from his tiny fingers. I'm glad you liked it. I smiled at them warmly. Now run back home. It looks like the rain will only get heavier. We will, Lilith, they both called. Take care, honeys. Jeanette waved them goodbye as they were walking out. Bye, Jeanette. Bye, Lilith. I heard their sweet voices. I chuckled and hurriedly brought a mop to wipe the wet floor around the door and the counter. She should pay you more. Donna, I mean, Jeanette stated lazily, leaning against the table by the door. Yes, she should, I smirked. I mean it. If it weren't for your cakes and muffins, no one would have come here to drink that coffee from a machine that is broken every second day, she claimed, crossing arms on her chest. But it doesn't matter anymore. I put away the floor mop and stood beside her to teasingly ruffle her curly hair. I'm leaving in 2 days. I will take my money and leave this town. Why? I mean, I know this town is a shitty hole, but it was a little less shitty with you here. Jeanette sulked. I just really cannot stay in one place for too long. I sighed. Are you one of those who try to find their place on Earth? Or is somebody chasing you? She chuckled. I laughed nervously, trying to hide the fact that she accidentally pointed out my true reason for constant running away. Luckily, she didn't notice my awkward expression. Anyway, good for you. She combed her hair back the way it was. It would be a waste if a clever girl like you stayed here longer. I'm gonna miss you though. I'll miss you too. I smiled, taking the mop to the back room. The bell hanging above the door rang again. This time it was Joe and Frank, 2 locals, who always dropped by for coffee and pie as soon as they finished their shift guarding the local factory. It's raining cats and dogs out there, Joe hissed, literally dropping tons of water from his jacket. For God's sake, Joe. I've just wiped the floor. I called out, annoyed, bringing the mop from the back once more. I'll do it, Jeanette offered. No. I'll do it. Just give them coffee, I grunted. Joe and Frank smiled awkwardly, then bowed apologetically, responding to my glare. They sat at the bar table. Jeanette quickly brought them 2 cups and poured them coffee from the pot. Obviously, it was one of those days when the coffee machine broke again. I started wiping the floor, and then noticed that the bell above the door was tilted on one side. I stood up on my tiptoes trying to correct it, stretching my hand as much as I could. Suddenly, someone opened the door, pushing me away and making me lose my balance. Oh God, I'm going to fall, I thought, shutting my eyes close. Yet surprisingly, I didn't fall. I landed in somebody's arms. I carefully opened my eyes and saw an insanely handsome man with strange silver hair and glowing gray eyes. Unlike his hair, his long lashes were black as night. "Are you my angel?" I mumbled, dumbly staring at his incredible face. He smiled faintly and helped me get back on my feet. Only then did I see that, except for having a handsome face, he was also tall and had a sexy figure. He was wearing a long black coat with a black suit underneath. He looked nothing like the locals. He kept looking me up and down in silence until I came back to my senses. I'm sorry and thank you. I stuttered like a complete idiot, clearly showing how flustered I had become. "You're welcome," he replied in a deep, alluring voice. Then he grabbed his closed umbrella, passed me by, and sat at the table deep in the cafe. I turned around to get him a menu from the counter and saw Jeanette standing still with her mouth wide open. "He is so hot," she whispered, although I wasn't sure if she was discreet enough. "Hush. Control yourself a little," I scolded her, nervously taking the card. "Can't help it. I want to have his baby. Now if possible," she stated, staring at him blankly. I should take his order," I muttered and walked to his table. "What's with the gloves?" he suddenly asked, looking at my hands. I laughed nervously. "It's just a habit of mine," I replied, hiding my hands behind my back. "A habit?" he repeated, smirking. "What can I get for you?" I asked, trying to quickly change the subject. "Coffee, perhaps?" he answered nonchalantly. "I wouldn't recommend it," I smiled awkwardly. "Our coffee machine is broken, so we only have the one from the drip coffee maker, but its taste." "I bet that I'll like the coffee you make," he tossed seductively. I couldn't tell why, but he was making me feverish, and my body shivered every time I glanced into his bright eyes. "Why would you say that you'll like my coffee?" I laughed faintly. "Have you ever tried it before?" I gazed curiously at him, trying to recall if I had ever seen him there, but chances for me to forget someone as peculiar as he were close to zero. "Oh, I'm certain I'll like it," he chuckled and slightly licked his lip. "I know that because you smell like sunshine. Time to go." I froze and smiled awkwardly at my silver-haired customer. Throughout my life, I had been learned to hide my emotions. I had never let my guard down in front of anyone, especially men. I used to stay unmoved, no matter who that guy was or how he looked. But in front of this person, I felt helpless, as if he could see right through me. I found it terrifying. "I'll get you a coffee then." I turned around towards the counter. "Espresso kind black?" I tossed on my way there. "As long as you make it," he slightly chuckled. "What a flirt," I muttered, annoyed, yet sensing that my face was turning red. I couldn't understand my reactions. I used to ignore anyone whom I would hear such words from. If I had a worse day, I would even quickly make him regret that he dared to say a single word to me. But now, I kept blushing like an idiot. I went to the bar, making sure I was turned around the whole time to avoid my peculiar customer's gaze. For some reason, I was convinced that he kept his eyes on me the entire time. My hands started to tremble nervously. I took a cup from a shelf, and I almost made it slip and fall on the floor. Luckily, I was able to catch it at the last second. "What is wrong with me today?" I asked myself in my head. "Concentrate, Lilith." I gazed at Jeanette. I guess she was too busy chatting with Joe and Frank, constantly refilling their coffee cups, to notice my sudden clumsiness. When she noticed my stare, she chuckled and winked at me. "Go get him," she whispered teasingly, glimpsing at the silver-haired. I took a deep breath and started brewing his coffee. I poured hot water to moisten the paper filter, then put freshly grounded coffee on it, and started making a dark brown potion. I finished and carried the cup to my customer's table, consciously avoiding his gaze. "Your coffee, sir." I put the cup in front of him, slightly turning my eyes from him. "Am I repulsive to you?" he asked with his charming voice. "And not at all," I burst out without knowing. He smirked, then looked into my eyes as if he wanted to devour me. I flinched and stepped away from his table. "Thank you for the coffee, Lilith," he smiled courteously, looking at the name tag on my shirt. "Enjoy your coffee," I muttered hesitantly and walked back behind the counter. The way he said my name felt strange, as if he already knew who I was. Suddenly, I became anxious. Could he be someone that he sent to find me? No, he doesn't smell like them. I've been learning how to sense them for years. That silver-haired is not one of them for sure, I pondered. I nervously corrected the gloves on my hands, then took an empty coffee pot from the bar table. Lilith, Jackson asked about you again, you know? Why don't you give that poor guy a chance? Frank chuckled. Sorry, let's just say that Jackson is not my type. I smirked, taking dirted paper napkins from the bar. Suddenly Frank grabbed my wrist. Don't be like that. If he's not your type, maybe I am. He chuckled obnoxiously. Let go of my hand, Frank. This is not funny, I hissed. Come on, Lilith. You're such a prude. You should have some fun. He looked me up and down. I said no. I forcefully pulled my hand out of his grasp. Hey! Frank stood up and tried to reach for my hand, bending over the bar table. I dodged, making him fall onto the bar, knocking off a few glasses and the empty pot I just took away. The glasses shattered on the floor. One of the pieces stabbed my arm. I pressed the injured place in a panic and froze. What the hell, Frank? Jeanette yelled. She grabbed my bleeding hand and instantly started dragging me towards the shelf with a first aid kit. I'm sorry. I only wanted her to loosen up a bit. I didn't mean to. Frank freaked out after seeing blood dripping from my arm. Jeanette opened the box and took out the bandage and the patches. I will do it myself. I grabbed the kit from Jeanette's hands and started treating the wound myself. Fine. She raised her hands, startled by my reaction. I only wanted to help you. Thank you, but I'd rather do it myself. I smiled forcefully. She stepped back with a grimace on her face and went back to scolding Frank. I patched my hand as quickly as I could. God, don't let them smell my blood. Please, don't let them smell my blood. I prayed in my mind. Due to the commotion Frank caused, I completely forgot about my mysterious silver-haired customer. Somehow, I started thinking that he must have thought of me as a total freak, seeing me overly reacting to a simple cut. I looked at his table, but he wasn't there. I walked over there. His seat was empty, and all his things were gone. He disappeared without a trace. It looked like he took merely a single sip of coffee from the cup I brought. There was a $100 bill lying on the table by the cup. Guess he didn't like my coffee after all. At least he is a good tipper. I smirked, taking the money. Jeanette finally got rid of Frank and Joe, right after she had made them pay for the damage that Frank caused. They were the last clients we had that day. We spent the rest of our work time wiping the glass off the floor and around the counter. Donna, the lovely owner of our cafe, didn't show up. She just gave us a call to close at 10 o'clock like we usually did. I kept thinking about the silver-haired customer. How could he leave the cafe without any of us noticing? I was so intrigued that I instantly thought of checking our surveillance camera recording. I told Jeanette that I would close the store myself, and as soon as I finished my work, I went to check the footage. Surprisingly, I found that the one camera showing the area where he sat was broken. How odd, I muttered to myself. Wasn't it repaired just 2 days ago? It was slightly frustrating, but I was too curious to simply forget about it. I was unable to give a clear reason why, but I had to see what was recorded on other cameras, trying to find a single screenshot of his face. This is ridiculous. Why do I even want to see his face again? He looked like he wasn't from around here, and I will leave this place in 2 days. I mocked my own actions. Of course, I kept searching for any signs of him on the footage anyway. I found the moment when I had almost fallen on the floor while he'd been walking through the door. I had seen myself correcting the tilted bell, and the picture went black. The black screen stayed for about a minute of the recording, then some distortion appeared, and the footage went back to normal right after. What the hell? I called, checking it for the 3rd time. Did he carry some wave-disturbing device with him or something? I clicked my tongue and groaned displeased. Then I finally gave up and turned everything off. I sighed deeply, took my things from the back room, and walked out to close the cafe. At least it finally stopped raining. I grabbed the keys and unknowingly hung my purse on my injured forearm. I hissed, feeling a stabbing pain. But the worst thing was that my wound had reopened. My heart started to race. I took off my jacket and started to wrap it around my bleeding arm. It was too late. The wind already carried the smell of my blood around. I hurriedly closed the door, feeling how my body started to shiver. Then I walked faster and faster. I prayed that nothing bad would happen, that they hadn't found my trace yet. A second later, a howling sound confirmed the exact thing I was afraid of. That sound was their calling. They were gathering. They were getting closer. They found me. I won't give up. I thought I saw a wolf-shaped shade just around the corner. I flinched and ran in the opposite direction. I couldn't believe that the ones who were looking for me got here so fast. It couldn't have been merely the smell of my blood that betrayed my location. They must have known about it for some time. Could it be that they were sniffing around the town earlier without me knowing? I wondered in panic. I had become careless. I had never made such a stupid mistake. I had been fooling them for years, and yet, I got myself in a situation when I was unprepared. I need to get home fast. I need to take my survival bag, then get to the train station. After that, I need to take the money from the deposit box at the station and get the hell out of here. I planned in my mind while running. Suddenly, I heard a deep growling sound coming from the alley right in front of me. I stopped. I saw 3 wolf-shaped shades ominously appearing on the wall of the building. I turned around and saw 2 other wolf shades in the alley behind me. I was surrounded. I sighed and tossed my purse onto the ground. Then I stood in a fighting position and clenched my fists. 5 on 1. That is not very gentlemanly of you. I called out. The wolf-shaped shades started to turn into human silhouettes. We don't want to hurt you, princess. Not unless you give us a reason. The voice coming from the alley in front of me snarled. 3 men walked out right in front of me. They were all tall, and their bodies were filled with muscles. I gulped and clenched my fists even harder, standing steady on my feet. Just give up. You won't fight us all. I heard from the man who just came from the back alley. They were coming closer, sneering, and looking me up and down with disdain. I took a deep breath. Calm down, Lilith. You have to calm down. Aim for the vital spots. You can do it. You can fight them and run away. I talked to myself. They stood in a circle around me. I kept glancing at all of them, turning around, and waiting for the first one to attack. Look, princess. We don't have to entertain you. Surrender and go quietly. The one that resembled the strongest one reached out his hand my way, painting a sneering smile. I used that opportunity to grab his arm and throw him to the ground using his own strength against him. He moaned painfully. How dare you, lowly human? Another one roared and came right at me. Fortunately, his fist wasn't fast enough to hit me. I dodged the punch. Then I hit his chin with the base of my palm and aimed for his eyes. He bellowed in fury. There were 2 down and 3 more to go. The next one attacked me from behind. I used my hands and elbows to release myself from his grip, then turned around and hit his solar plexus. I knew that if I were to survive, I had to move even faster. As soon as he bent down, I passed him by and started running away. 2 others started chasing me. I used all of my strength to speed up. I clenched my teeth, telling myself that I had to escape from them. I briefly turned my head around to check my distance from them. There was a slight chance that they wouldn't catch up quickly. I smirked and sped up even more. I knew I had to get around the corner. There was an old abandoned building there. It was a perfect place to hide. I ran straight, clenching my fists. I was getting closer. Only a few more steps, and I would reach the building. Suddenly, a tall, red-haired man appeared right in front of me. He smiled wickedly while spreading his arms wide and blocking my way. I recognized him right away. No, only not him. I screamed inside my mind. I jumped to the side, frantically trying to find some other route to escape. But he was much faster than those other men chasing me. Where do you think you are going, princess? He hissed, grabbing me by the collar. His grip was so strong it almost made me choke. He pulled me back and tossed me to the ground. I jumped up on my feet. My only chance was to attack him and run. He was too tall for me to aim at his face, and my kicks might not have been strong and fast enough to damage him. I clenched my teeth, hit his stomach, and quickly jumped back. He only chuckled, while I felt as if I had broken my hand. I turned around, hoping for a chance to run away from him, but the other men were already there. I was surrounded. Give up, princess. If you choose to resist, I will have to break a few bones in your pretty body. The red-haired chuckled coldly. I panted heavily. No matter how hard I trained my body over the 20 years of my life, I was still not even nearly a match for them. My human body was at its limit, but surrendering wasn't an option. Not a chance, Derek. If you want me, you will have to kill me. I roared, standing again in a fighting position. Well, don't say I didn't warn you, he smirked, then nodded his head, telling the men behind me to attack. 2 of them grabbed my arms, trying to restrain me. I stomped on one's foot and kicked the other's legs out. I thought that it was my chance. I had to use it and escape at any cost. I barged straight ahead, but then Derek blocked my way. He swiftly grabbed my neck and lifted me up. I couldn't breathe. I struggled, trying to release myself from his hand that clenched my throat. I grabbed it with both of my hands, but I couldn't even lift one finger of his palm. I tried using my legs to kick him, but the lack of oxygen in my lungs quickly cut all of my strength. He laughed, waiting for me to stop resisting. Tears started to flow from my eyes. I didn't want to give up. I couldn't give up. I couldn't win either. I gazed straight into Derek's eyes. I wanted to let him know how much I despised him before I couldn't move anymore. Feeling how life was slowly floating out of my body, he finally released his grip, tossing me down to the ground. I started coughing and desperately trying to fill my lungs again. He crouched right beside me. If you haven't been this valuable, I would have killed you a long time ago, he whispered to my ear. I kept lying on the ground, struggling to catch my breath. I couldn't force myself to stand up, even though I fiercely tried. Derek took out a syringe from his pocket and took off the needle cover with his teeth. I won't risk your rebellious moves, princess. You are going to get some nice sleep while we're on our way, he snickered, injecting my neck. I tried to pull out the needle, but it was too late. The drug started circulating in my veins. It hurt. I felt as if my whole skin had started to burn. I lifted my head. You son of a b***tch. I hissed faintly, covering the injected spot. Such vulgar language, Your Highness? Derek mocked me. I will make sure to crush your arrogance very soon. Instantly my legs became weak. I could barely move a muscle. Even so, I still struggled to lift my upper body with my arms, as if it could allow me to improve my desperate situation. I just needed to do something. Those vicious men came to grab me by my arms and started to drag me towards a back alley. The focus of my sight was decreasing. I felt as if my world had become darker. My head was spinning. Let me go. Release me. Help. Somebody help. I muttered, ineptly trying to strengthen up my voice. Suddenly, I noticed a black shadow moving fast. It passed by the men who were dragging me and disappeared at the corner of an old building. Stupid mutts, an ominous voice laughed. I lifted my eyes to look ahead and saw the shape of a man in a long black coat. The high collar of his coat was standing, covering most of his face. Who the hell are you? Derek fumed. You don't need to know that, the man chuckled. Get out of here if you know what's good for you. One of Derek's men snarled. Can't do that. The man in the coat walked closer, smirking. Derek's man rushed towards the man in the coat. He jumped up with a kick, but the coat man grabbed his leg with one hand and broke it. You are dead, Derek bellowed in fury. The man in the coat walked closer into the light. Only then, I was able to notice his shining silver hair. It was the man I met at the cafe. I gasped. You cannot kill me, he sighed nonchalantly, then put on a malicious grin on his face. I am already dead. My night. I was slowly losing consciousness. I could no longer recognize all the sounds and blurry images. I could only see the rage in Derek's men while ineptly attacking the silver-haired. They ignored me and left me lying on the ground while they all charged at the stranger. I could hear their bones breaking. I could hear their screams and painful howling. There wasn't even an ounce of sympathy in me towards them. But at the same time, I was far from being safe. Who is this person? He is much stronger than all those wolves. Is he a shapeshifter like them? Why did he say that he is dead? Is he some kind of freaking zombie or something? Why is he attacking them? Is he going to kill them? And, if he does, is he going to kill me too? I wondered in panic. The drug flowing in my blood paralyzed me. My awareness was fading. I was terrified and helpless. I didn't want to come back with Derek and his men, but the more I didn't want to die in the hands of some madman. Suddenly all the fighting stopped. I could only hear silence and someone's footsteps. I saw a pair of black leather shoes right in front of me. I slightly lifted my head. The silver-haired man was leaning over me. Please, don't kill me," I mumbled, using the final ounce of my strength. "Well, let me think what to do with you." The deep, alluring sound of his voice reached my ears. I closed my eyes. The drug put my body to sleep. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was already getting up. I found myself lying on the bench in the park, close to the place where I lost my consciousness. Fortunately, it was still too early for people to come to the park. I was there completely alone. I was covered with a black coat. I could have sworn it was the same coat that the silver-haired wore. My purse was lying on the ground right beside the bench. It was a strange feeling. I was used to taking care of myself. No one had ever come to my rescue before. Of course, my state didn't exactly put me in the mood to think of myself as some novel heroine. It looks like my silver-haired knight saved me, but still didn't care enough to take me back to his castle. At least he secured my documents and money. I chuckled sourly. I was lying on the bench trying to force my muscles to move. I had a hard time processing what had exactly happened the previous night. I was suffering from a terrible hangover that the drug that I was injected with gave me. The rising sun wasn't exactly helping me recover. At that moment, I would gladly sell my soul for painkillers, but I had no time to act pitiful. I wasn't safe in this town. Nonetheless, I was restless. I needed to check the place of last night's attack, hoping that I would find anything. I finally managed to get up from the bench. The morning was chilly, so I decided to wear the black coat that my silver-haired savior left me. It looked expensive, and its fabric was soft and warm. The sleeves were too long. I had to roll them up. The whole coat was so long that it almost reached my ankles, but except for that, it surprisingly fitted more or less. I wrapped it around and slowly walked towards the place of yesterday's fight. When I got there, I found it completely empty. There were no bodies, no bloodstains on the ground, and no traces of a fight. That only made me more anxious. Who the hell was that guy? My mind was frantically looking for answers. Perhaps I would feel a little less restless if there were any evidence that the wolves were dead. If they weren't, we would certainly send backups to this town to look for me. It was possible that they could have sent a signal already. If they did, then my time would start running out fast. I looked around one more time. I even touched the dirt on the ground, and then sniffed my hand to find any traces of blood drops or the smell of the bleach. I found neither. That could only mean that none of those wolves died here. I gritted my teeth. I could only mean that all of them were alive somewhere, maybe not too far away. Even if that silver-haired guy broke most of the bones in their bodies, they would regenerate in less than 24 hours. It would take a little longer if their spines were broken. Even if I couldn't figure out what had happened, I needed to assume that they were going to attack me soon. I rushed to my apartment, constantly looking over my shoulder. I packed some clothes for sets of documents that I hadn't used before, then grabbed my laptop and ran out, leaving only a short note to the landlord with the money for the rent on the table. I did everything abruptly. I gave up on taking my last paycheck from Donna and went to the train station. After getting my cash from the deposit box, I picked up a random destination and bought a ticket. It wasn't the best way to say goodbye to Sunnybridge, but I had already gotten used to leaving everything behind. The train left the station. Only then did I feel I could breathe. My mind finally had the time to process. I hoped that Derek and the rest of his team wouldn't catch my scent. But speaking of the scent, I was still wearing that guy's black coat. I smirked and sniffed its collar. It had a weak smell of male perfume. It was a pleasant scent. Seriously, it's not the time to get horny. I scolded myself for my shameless thoughts. Besides, that guy is incredibly dangerous. I couldn't stop thinking about how he was able to defeat all of the wolves by himself. Was he also a supernatural creature? A super werewolf? Or something else? My mind was going crazy. I was born a human, but I quickly learned about the existence of shapeshifters that human legends called werewolves. Those creatures had incredibly sharp senses, were much stronger than humans, and they could turn into wolves. From when I was 5 years old, I had to learn how to fight them, even though it was never a fair fight. I had never seen anyone who could defeat a werewolf, until that night. Who was he? He couldn't have been just a human. My vision wasn't clear, but that definitely wasn't human kind of strength that he used. Moreover, why did he help me? I kept wondering while riding the train to my new destination. Who would have thought that I would have to wait 3 years to find answers to my questions? Just an accident. I spent the next few years wandering around many places. I hadn't encountered any wolves that were chasing me, but I had never stayed in one spot longer than 3 months either. Of course, it was harder to earn any money that way. That was why I decided to open an online business that I could run without revealing my true name. What I was selling were investment advices. I have always been good at predicting how the market would respond to certain events. Even my teachers used to call me a genius in that field. Actually, business and the stock market weren't my only areas of expertise. I could easily become the best in any subject. The problem was, my so-called family would never allow me to get a decent university diploma, or any university diploma at that. I was only allowed to graduate from St. Anna's College, after graduating from St. Anna's High School, after growing up in St. Anna's Orphanage. Yes, the situation between me and my family was always a little peculiar. Certainly, I didn't have any good memories from my childhood. I used to wish that I didn't have a living family and had a chance to be adopted as any other child living at the orphanage. What could have been more frustrating to a growing child than the fact that it had been abandoned? But strangely, there was no permission for adoption. I used to wonder how it was even possible, until I learned that my precious father was actually the founder of the St. Anna's Orphanage. That was the moment I realized that I wasn't being raised. I was being imprisoned and monitored. Everything was better than living as if I was shackled in chains. The life I lived as a nomad, or rather a fugitive, was far better, even though I constantly looked behind my shoulder. It had been 7 years since I started running. If that was what I had to do in order to be free for the rest of my life, I would pay that price gladly. Starting an online company wasn't exactly easy, especially since I had no name, no diploma, and no recommendation. I spent a lot of time sending anonymous emails to rich businessmen, company presidents, and CEOs. I gave each of them one advice free of charge. After they learned that my predictions were correct, they were usually becoming my clients. They started sending me certain issues to analyze or problems to solve. I had never met any of my clients in real life. I always contacted them by email, and I even kept changing the email address once a month. Each assignment was charged depending on the difficulty of the task, but it never took me more than a few hours to get my job done. That was how I started earning money, big money. Too bad I had no real possibility of spending it. I could never live too lavishly, trying not to draw attention, but I stopped living in slums or working at coffee shops. I could afford to buy myself designer clothes, but I kept buying only what was necessary to live comfortably. There was one expensive piece of clothing hanging in my closet, and that was the black coat that my silver-haired knight left me. I had never met him in those 3 years, but I kept thinking about him. Perhaps it was because I thought of him as my savior, and there was no one who had ever stood up for me before like that. It felt surreal, not to mention that he was amazingly hot. In my entire life, there was only one person that had ever cared for me. It was someone who called himself my mother's friend, Ezra. Ezra became my teacher, my shoulder to cry on, and my father figure. He sacrificed himself for me, so I could run away from my hell. I had no contact with him since then, but I still hoped that he was alive. After all, he became the only light in the world of a miserably abandoned child. No one except for Ezra had ever reached out his hand towards me, not to mention an absolute stranger. That year I turned 27. It was early autumn. I finished my latest assignment and sent all the information to my client. I needed to get my mind off of numbers and statistics, and I decided to go for a run. I usually ran a few miles to clear my head before going to sleep, but that night I didn't know why I ran much further. I had a strange feeling that I needed to get somewhere. I kept running in an unknown direction until I found myself out of town on an empty road. It was dark, but I didn't stop running even when the moon became the only light I had. Suddenly, I saw some flashing lights on the side of the road. When I got closer, I noticed it was a car blinker. I flinched and ran closer. There was a black car that crashed into a tree. A slight fume was coming from under the hood. "Hello. Does anyone need help?" I called cautiously, getting closer to a car. No one replied. I looked at the front seats through the crashed front window. There was a man sitting there behind the wheel. It looked like he was unconscious. His face was covered in blood. "Please don't be dead. Don't be dead. Don't be dead," I muttered, going to his side of the car. I grabbed the door handle. It was jammed. I was struggling for a while, but I managed to open it. As soon as I looked inside the car, I froze. Silver-haired knight. I mumbled in panic. There was blood coming from his nose, lips, and even eyes, but other than that, I couldn't notice any serious injury. My hands were trembling as I reached out my hand to check his pulse. My fingers were almost touching the skin of his neck, when suddenly he grabbed my hand. I screamed. He slowly opened his blooded eyes and looked at me. His stare was overwhelming and filled with a strange hunger. I gazed at him, terrified. I felt as if my heart was about to burst out of my chest. "Phone," he said softly while still holding my hand tight. "Wire P phone?" I stuttered. He slightly nodded his head and tossed my hand away. "I have mine. I can call for an ambulance." "No," he said, cutting me off. "My phone fast. Why, you still have your seatbelt on. And maybe I should get you out of here first." "Phone," he hissed. His tone was cold and demanding, even though he looked like he was on the verge of death. I decided not to argue with him. I leaned over him, trying to find it. It couldn't have been an easy task. I guessed that I was looking for the black object, but the problem was I was looking for it in the middle of a black car. Luckily, I found his phone lying on the floor of the passenger seat. I just needed to reach it. I glanced at him. He closed his eyes again. I touched his face. It was cold as ice. "Hey, don't fall asleep. I found where your phone is," I shouted, trying to keep him conscious. "Give it to me," he muttered with his eyes closed. I briefly looked to examine his body again. I could see nothing serious in his condition, yet he was fading away. But it could have been an internal injury as well. The time was running out. As much as I found searching for his phone unreasonable at that moment, I decided to join his madness and reach for this damn phone. It felt awkward, but I had no other choice than to bend over his knees and stretch my hand out. My upper body was literally lying on him, while I tried to touch the floor around the passenger seat. Suddenly, I felt his body move. He tensed his muscles as if he became agitated. I flinched, hurriedly grabbed the phone, and got up from his knees. "I have your phone," I stated nervously. He stretched his hand out to get it from me, but then he started coughing blood. I cringed, but I needed to help him somehow. It was only rational to try taking him out of that car. Without asking for his permission, I leaned over him and unfastened his seatbelt. "Get away," he roared all of a sudden. I jumped back away from him and clenched my teeth. "I'm trying to help you," I yelled. "Call Leo. Tell him where," he muttered, then closed his eyes. "Hey, sir," I shouted desperately, but he stopped responding. I cautiously leaned over him. I couldn't see his chest moving. I froze. I slightly reached my hand to touch his cheek. He didn't move. I gasped. I knew I should have called that damn ambulance. I fumed, looking at his unconscious body. I was clenching his phone in my hand. Then I started thinking that perhaps it wasn't too late. Maybe that Leo was his personal doctor. Maybe he could save him. I used his cold finger to turn on and enter his phone. Then I found a contact named Leo and made the call. To the rescue. I nervously squeezed the stranger's phone while listening to the waiting signal. Finally, someone took the call. "Master, where are you? Everyone's looking for your highness," the man's voice feverishly shouted over the phone. "Oh, Hagahilo," I muttered hesitantly. "Who is this?" The person on the other side of the phone changed his tone. "How did you get Master's phone?" he asked harshly. "Am I talking to Leo?" I waited for the reply, but the silence made me realize it was a dumb question. "Your friend, Master or whatever, had a car accident. I found him. He told me not to call an ambulance and call you instead," I explained nervously. Leo became quiet for some time. I even checked if he didn't hang up the phone. Hello," I mumbled, impatient for any kind of response. I tracked the phone. "Wait there. We will be there in 20 minutes tops," he stated coldly and ended the call. I wanted to say something, but I merely opened my mouth and gasped when I heard the clicking sound of the phone hanging up. Seriously? How about please wait, or thank you for calling me? Who does he think he is? I muttered, annoyed. Then I looked at the car, and an unconscious silver-haired guy. I sighed, then clenched my teeth. I found calling some Leo, instead of getting an ambulance here, completely insane. Besides, that guy in the car looked like he was already dead. What if this Leo gets here and blames me for his master's death? I wondered frantically. In an instinctual reaction, I decided to at least get him out of the car and try performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. No matter how the silver-haired opposed bringing him to the hospital, leaving him without not even trying to rescue him seemed inhuman. I walked back towards the car and opened the door on the driver's side wide. Then I grabbed his arms and bit by bit tried to move him out of the car. I kept looking for any signs of a major injury, but his bleeding occurred solely around his nose and mouth. Then I also noticed blood under his fingernails. What the hell? Is he sick or something? I wondered frantically while pulling out his unconscious body. Finally, I managed to get him out of the car and lay him down on the ground on the side of the road. I took a closer look at his face. He was amazingly handsome. He truly looked like an angel. He wore a black, fitted suit and a dark gray shirt, which additionally made him irresistible. I couldn't understand myself, but somehow I found every detail about him amazingly alluring. Should I check if he doesn't have any injuries under that shirt? I wondered hesitantly while taking another deep breath. Certainly. I slapped my own face for having weird thoughts towards an innocent victim of an accident. Then I clenched my fists, trying to tell myself to focus on switching my brain to rationality. I should definitely check his pulse again, and then perform CPR, I decided. I reached out my trembling hand towards his neck. I didn't even know why I was nervous so much. Perhaps it was because his aura was overwhelming even though he was lying on the ground unconscious. I touched the side of his neck, pressing the carotid artery. His skin was cold as if his body temperature was way below 36.6 degrees Celsius. Then I felt his pulse, but it was strange. It was unnaturally slow. As I counted, it was less than 20 beats per minute. My mind was filled with all sorts of thoughts. I shouldn't perform CPR merely because his heartbeat is slow, right? Even if his heart beats weakly, it is still a beating heart, right? What if he is hibernating or something? Should I warm him up? Or is it his normal temperature? What the hell is he? Suddenly, I saw some weird blue lines painting themselves across his veins and arteries on his neck. I followed my unrestrainable curiosity and unbuttoned his shirt. The blue lines were more visible on his chest, making every one of his blood vessels clearly visible. His condition obviously wasn't caused by an accident. It looked like some kind of disease. I only hoped that this Leo would be really able to help him. I had no idea about his condition. His state could be contagious. But even though I felt illogically drawn towards him, I gently touched the skin on his perfectly muscled chest and ran my fingers across the blue line on his jugular towards his heart. I did it unconsciously. When I realized I was touching him, I quickly moved my hand away, giving myself a mental slap. Lilith, you really are a horny pervert. I rebuked myself, unable to understand my own actions. I buttoned up his shirt again, and additionally covered his chest with his jacket. I did it solely to prevent myself from doing something awkward again. But inside my mind, I used the excuse that I was doing it to keep the patient warm. Suddenly, I saw some cars heading in our direction. One of them looked like a limousine, the other one was a larger van, and the third one looked like a car transporter. They were all black, and the car lights almost blinded me. The limousine stopped right beside the unconscious guy and me. Two other cars parked right behind it. Some men started walking out of those cars. They were all wearing black suits which made them resemble government security agents. It was hard to see their faces because of the car's headlights. They moved in silence, completely ignoring my presence. A few of them immediately rushed towards the silver-haired man. The rest surrounded the whole street, securing the area around the accident. Those who went towards the silver-haired carried armored, aluminum briefcases. I wanted to see what they were about to do, but one of those men hurriedly walked towards me and blocked my view. "Are you the one I talked to on the phone?" he asked coldly. "I guess. You are Leo, right?" I smiled nervously. The man stepped closer. His demeanor resembled a kind of ancient noble posture and gestures. His fair skin and perfectly combed dark brown hair made him look even more sophisticated. Yet his overpowering expression made me feel uncomfortable. "My name is Leonard Gotha. I would appreciate it if you called me respectably," he hissed. "Do you mind introducing yourself, miss?" His arrogance made my temple vein twitch. I forcefully stretched my grimace into an awkward smile while doing my best to hold back my annoyance. "My name is Lilith Fleming. Mr. Gotha," I squeezed out. "Fleming like Alexander Fleming?" He chuckled mockingly. "Yes. Is there something wrong with my name?" I grunted. "Not at all, Ms. Fleming," he smirked, looking me up and down. I became slightly flustered. No one had ever questioned any of my numerous identities and last names I made up over the years. How did he know that it was a fake name right away? I figured that I should change the subject as soon as possible. "Is he going to be okay?" I pointed at the silver-haired while leaning out from his right shoulder. He hurriedly stepped to the right, blocking my view again. "Master's condition will improve as soon as he gets his medicine," he claimed, clearly annoyed by my curiosity. What kind of medicine that would be? I smirked, intentionally getting on his nerves. "This is none of your concern, Miss Fleming," he hissed. "Well, it kind of is," I smirked, looking straight into his eyes. "His state wasn't caused by an accident, which means he is sick. If his state is caused by a contagious disease, then don't you think it would be best if I knew about it as well?" "Oh, I assure you that Master's state is not easily transmittable," he chuckled. "Really? Then what is it?" I had no intention of backing off. Mr. Gotha sighed. He was poisoned. Moreover, his phone was off. "Thanks to you, we got here in time to save him," he stated dryly. "That was the worst thank you I've ever heard." I muttered softly, irked. "Don't worry. I'm certain that my master would like to award you once he regains his consciousness. I'm sure that the money check will be more than satisfactory," he replied, obviously hearing my complaints. "No need," I glared at him. "Your master saved my life once. He may think of it as returning a favor." "How did you meet master before?" he burst out fearfully, looking me up and down. His sudden reaction made me flinch and step back. But then I saw him staring into my eyes, impatient to hear my answer. I took a deep breath. He came to the cafe that I worked, and then he showed up when I was in trouble and saved me from my problem. I shrugged. I noticed Mr. Gotha started glancing at the sides of my neck. His peculiar, spiteful stare made me feel as if he suspected me of doing something dirty, but I couldn't comprehend his reasons. Nonetheless, it made me uncontrollably cover my neck with my hands. When I did, he clicked his tongue. "Anyway, we will take care of everything. So you may go your way, Miss Fleming," he tossed nonchalantly, turned around, and walked towards the rest of the men gathered around the silver-haired guy. The level of his insolence made me speechless. If my brain worked faster enough to react, I would have surely punched that smug face of his. I watched him go while angrily clenching my teeth. The men in the suits took the silver-haired guy's unconscious body to the back of the black van. They also carefully packed all the aluminum briefcases and brought them back to their cars. In the meantime, the crashed car was already loaded on the car transporter. I didn't even notice when it all had happened. It resembled some kind of top-secret mission. Realizing that brought chills to my spine. I just hoped that none of them would decide to get rid of the only living witness. Yet the reality was quite the opposite of what I expected. Everyone abruptly went back to their cars, ignoring me just as before. Mr. Gotha turned around briefly to nod his head, which I was probably supposed to read as goodbye. And then they drove away, leaving me in the middle of the dark and empty road. It took me a while to realize my poor situation. Only when I was left alone, hearing nothing but the sound of crickets and owls calling from the nearby woods, my mind restarted, and my blood began to boil. "Seriously, you didn't even ask me if I wanted a ride home," I shouted angrily. I wanted to kick something to release my rage. On the side of the road, I saw a piece of plastic left by them. The fact that they even left some trash behind them made me even more mad. I swung my foot, making the plastic fly. Only then did I notice it was a plastic bag. As I kicked it, some leftover drops of fluid fell out, staining my white sports shoe. "Really? This day couldn't be more unlucky. I fumed, taking out a tissue from my pocket and wiping the shoe. I couldn't see the stains clearly, so I pulled out my phone and turned on a flashlight. The tissue that I wiped the shoe with was all colored in red. Is this blood? I gulped, finding my way. After the rescue team had disappeared, leaving me in the dangerous middle of nowhere, I had to struggle to find my way back home myself. For the first time, I found it fortunate that life had never been easy on me, and I had survived much more difficult situations than this before. Certainly, if I were some fragile princess, I would sit on the ground and cry my eyes out while trembling in fear. Now my current situation made me more furious than desperate. I even thought that it would be kind of fortunate if I met some perverts or aggressive drunkards on my way back, since I could take my anger off on them. Nevertheless, I still hoped to meet someone on the road who would be kind enough to give me a ride to a more civilized place. But judging on my luck that day, chances for that to happen were close to none. The road was dark and completely empty. I used my phone as a flashlight while walking back from where I ran, cursing my sense of empathy that was constantly getting me into trouble. Why the hell did I run so far in the first place? I yelled at myself. I should have demanded that they take me home. After all, if that guy wanted to give me money, why not just give me a ride instead? Crazy bastards. I fumed, releasing my frustration. It took me an additional hour to walk back to a place I could recognize. I was incredibly relieved to find one. Thankfully, I wasn't an idiot enough to take brainless, coincidental turns, and I only ran straight ahead. That saved me from asking for directions from some random strangers in the middle of the night. I even didn't want to think where it would lead me to. While I was walking, I kept thinking of the empty blood bag those people left on the side of the road. I nervously wondered if they were giving him a blood transfusion in such an unsterile environment. If so, they could have killed him more efficiently than his car accident or his disease. However, the more I thought about it, the more I doubted that they were transfusing blood. They should have done only what was necessary to save his life, until he got somewhere to receive treatment. Damn it. I should have called that stupid ambulance. I tormented myself over my decision, that I only found more stupid each time I thought about it. Finally, I got back home. I was exhausted and restless. For some reason, my heart kept pounding. I couldn't stop thinking about my handsome knight with silver hair. Lilith, for God's sake. You've done what he asked for. You've paid your dues. Stop torturing yourself. His men are taking care of him, and he is going to be fine. I scolded myself while looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I didn't even know why I cared so much about a person I knew nothing about. I didn't even know his name. Yet perhaps my subconscious was desperate to find some sort of comfort, and to silence my absurd anxieties. Unknowingly, I took out the black coat he once left me out of the closet. Then I covered myself with it, and just like that, I fell asleep. For the next couple of days, I unconsciously turned my head around every time I saw an expensive black car passing me by on the street. Maybe I idiotically thought that I would meet him again. This is ridiculous, I mocked myself. I bet that he was just driving through this town, and seeing him again around here equals the probability of winning the lottery. I'd been angry at myself for wasting my thoughts on something as meaningless as thinking about a guy. After all, even if I met him again, it wouldn't change the fact that my whole life was like a permanent escape. Having any kind of relationship was out of the question. That was also the reason why I had never had a lover nor a friend. I had no time for such things. I had even lost my virginity with a person whom I merely thought to be kind, healthy, and whose looks were on a satisfying level. It was a calculated move. I thought that I would decrease my value as an item that my father wanted to sell. Unfortunately, it didn't change a thing. My virginity had never been an important issue in the eyes of the pack. Certainly, as a clueless 20-year-old, I couldn't have been aware of it. That was the only time I had ever been with a man. It hurt a lot since he wasn't as gentle as he wanted me to believe he was. I thought I knew what I had decided on, but it was more like rape. When I had felt all the pain, I wanted him to stop, but he didn't. I cried for 3 days after my one-night stand had happened. Afterwards, there hadn't been a single day that I thought of having sex with someone. That was why I couldn't believe that all of my senses were going crazy at the mere thought of that silver-haired man. I had to keep my mind occupied not to think about him. I started taking on new assignments and concentrated on work. Thanks to that, the numbers on my bank accounts kept growing. Soon my lifestyle improved. Although I was on the run, I could select places to live more comfortably and rent bigger and more secure apartments. I stopped hiding in small towns and villages. With my current income, I could afford to move to the town where most of my clients lived, New Argent City. It was a place filled with prosperous companies and rich people. The prices of the apartments and costs of living there were sky high. Despite that, everyone dreamt of living there since it equaled being, or soon enough becoming rich. My most valuable clients had been pestering me to move there for more than half a year. Of course, none of them thought of my comfort. They were all doing their best to recruit me, so I could work solely for one of them. They all tried to tempt me with astronomical salaries, cars, or luxury apartments, ignoring the fact that none of them even knew my real name. I bet that they thought that once I moved to New Argent City, I could meet with them, and they would have a chance to persuade me. Obviously, I could never take the position they were offering, but the way they talked about the city made me want to live there, even for a short while. After all, it was easier to hide among hundreds of thousands of people than in a town where everyone knew each other. I found myself an apartment online. It wasn't too flashy, but still well secured and constantly monitored. I made the necessary advance payment, packed my things, and went to New Argent City, excited as never before. I thought that I would live there in safety. I couldn't have been more wrong.